Hello and welcome to Mongos Consulting YouTube channel. This channel provides tutorials in all areas of language technologies from language learning, through speech and language processing. Please like and subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to get new video updates. FSI German vocabulary, and basic sentences. How do you say, in Munich, in German?
In München.
How do you say, to meet, encounter, in German?
Treffen.
How do you say, he meets, in German?
Trifft.
How do you say, Mr. Object, in German?
Herrn, accusative form.
How do you say, Mr. Becker meets Mr. and Mrs. Allen in Munich, in German?
Herr Becker trifft Herrn und Frau Allen in München.
How do you say, the Allens, in German?
Allens.
How do you say, the American, in German?
Der Amerikaner.
How do you say, Americans, in German?
Amerikaner.
How do you say, the diplomat, in German?
Der Diplomat.
How do you say, a diplomat, a foreign service officer, in German?
Diplomat.
How do you say, the Allens are Americans? Mr. Allen is a foreign service officer, in German.
Allens sind Amerikaner. Herr Allen ist Diplomat.
How do you say, unstressed particle expressing polite interest or concern, in German?
Denn.
How do you say, hello, Mr. Becker? How are you, in German?
Guten Tag, Herr Becker. Wie geht es Ihnen denn?
How do you say, fine, thanks, in German?
Danke, gut.
How do you say, to know, be acquainted with, in German?
Kennen.
How do you say, you know, speaking to family or intimate friends, in German?
Du kennst.
How do you say, no exact equivalent? Here, Unstressed particle stressing an obvious fact. In German.
Doch.
How do you say, Mary, you know Mr. Becker, don't you? In German.
Maria, du kennst doch Herrn Becker, nicht wahr?
How do you say, of course, in German?
Natürlich.
How do you say, we, in German?
Wir.
How do you say, we have, in German?
Wir haben.
How do you say, for a long time, in German?
Lange.
How do you say, seen, in German?
Gesehen.
How do you say, yes, of course? We haven't seen you for a long time, Mr. Becker, in German.
Ja. Natürlich. Wir haben Sie lange nicht gesehen, Herr Becker.
How do you say, I was, in German?
Ich war.
How do you say, the month, in German?
Der Monat.
How do you say, for 2 months, in German?
2 Monate.
How do you say, I was in Bonn for 2 months, in German?
Ich war 2 Monate in Bonn.
How do you say, how long, in German?
Wie lange?
How do you say, to stay, remain, in German?
Bleiben.
How do you say, how long are you staying here in Munich, in German?
Wie lange bleiben Sie hier in München?
How do you say, probably, in German?
Wahrscheinlich.
How do you say, the year, in German?
Das Jahr.
How do you say, 1 year, in German?
Ein Jahr.
How do you say, probably for 1 year, in German?
Wahrscheinlich ein Jahr.
How do you say to please in German?
Gefallen.
How do you say it pleases in German?
Es gefällt.
How do you say you like it in German?
Es gefällt Ihnen.
How do you say polite way of addressing a married woman? Here, Mrs. Allen, in German.
Gnädige Frau.
How do you say how do you like it in Munich, Mrs. Allen, in German?
Wie gefällt es Ihnen in München, gnädige Frau?
How do you say to us in German?
Uns, Dative.
How do you say we like it in German?
Es gefällt uns.
How do you say beautiful in German?
Schön.
How do you say the city in German?
Die Stadt.
How do you say a beautiful city in German?
Eine schöne Stadt.
How do you say we like it here very much? Munich is a beautiful city in German.
Es gefällt uns hier sehr gut. München ist eine schöne Stadt.
How do you say to live, dwell in German?
Wohnen.
How do you say the vicinity, nearness in German?
Die Nähe.
How do you say in the vicinity, near in German?
In der Nähe.
How do you say the consulate in German?
Das Konsulat.
How do you say of the consulate in German?
Vom Konsulat.
How do you say do you live in the vicinity of the consulate in German?
Wohnen Sie in der Nähe vom Konsulat?
How do you say in the Bayerischen Hof Hotel in German?
Im Bayerischen Hof.
How do you say yes in the Bayerischen Hof in German?
Ja, Im bayerischen Hof.
How do you say nice in German?
Nett.
How do you say it's very nice there in German?
Es ist dort sehr nett.
How do you say to plan to do in German?
Vorhaben.
How do you say you plan to do in German?
Sie haben. Vor.
How do you say now in German?
Jetzt.
How do you say what do you plan to do now in German?
Was haben Sie denn jetzt vor?
How do you say to want or intend to in German?
Wollen.
How do you say we want, we intend to in German?
Wir wollen.
How do you say to go and eat in German?
Essen gehen.
How do you say we're planning to go and eat in German?
Wir wollen essen gehen.
How do you say to come along in German?
Mitkommen.
How do you say don't you want to come along in German?
Wollen Sie nicht mitkommen?
How do you say I'd be very glad to? Where are you going to eat in German?
Sehr gern. Wo essen Sie denn?
How do you say on Ludwigstrasse in German?
In der Ludwigstraße.
How do you say do you know the restaurant on Ludwigstrasse in German?
Kennen Sie das Restaurant in der Ludwigstraße?
How do you say the food in German?
Das Essen.
How do you say the food is very good there in German?
Das Essen ist dort sehr gut.
How do you say who in German?
Wer?
How do you say actually, really in German?
Eigentlich.
How do you say the lady in German?
Die Dame.
How do you say I wonder who the lady over there is in German?
Wer ist eigentlich die Dame dort?
How do you say she is speaking, talking in German?
Sie spricht.
How do you say just in German?
Gerade.
How do you say with in German?
Mit.
How do you say the waiter in German?
Der Ober.
How do you say with the waiter in German?
Mit dem Ober.
How do you say she's just talking to the waiter in German?
Sie spricht gerade mit dem Ober.
How do you say that's Miss Adams in German?
Das ist Fräulein Adams.
How do you say her object in German?
Sie, Accusative.
How do you say don't you know her in German?
Kennen Sie sie nicht?
How do you say to believe in German?
Glauben.
How do you say I believe in German?
Ich glaube.
How do you say no, I don't believe so in German?
Nein, ich glaube nicht.
How do you say to go in German?
Gehen.
How do you say I go in German?
Ich gehe.
How do you say often in German?
Oft.
How do you say to the movies in German?
Ins Kino.
How do you say I often go to the movies with her in German?
Ich gehe oft mit ihr ins Kino.
How do you say or in German?
Oder.
How do you say the American lady in German?
Die Amerikanerin.
How do you say an American lady in German?
Amerikanerin.
How do you say the German lady in German?
Die Deutsche.
How do you say a German lady in German?
Deutsche.
How do you say is she an American or a German in German?
Ist sie Amerikanerin oder Deutsche?
How do you say she's an American in German?
Sie ist Amerikanerin.
How do you say German in German?
Deutsch.
How do you say English in German?
Englisch.
How do you say do you speak English or German with her in German?
Sprechen Sie Deutsch oder Englisch mit ihr?
How do you say to be able in German?
Können.
How do you say she can in German?
Sie kann.
How do you say she can speak German very well in German?
Sie kann sehr gut Deutsch sprechen.
How do you say to go ride in a vehicle in German?
Fahren.
How do you say to that place in German?
Hin.
How do you say today in German?
Heute.
How do you say where are you going today in German?
Wo fahren Sie heute hin?
How do you say I intend, I plan in German?
Ich will.
How do you say then in German?
Dann.
How do you say to, toward in German?
Nach.
How do you say, I'm planning to go to shopping and then to tolls, in German?
Ich will nach Schwabing fahren, und dann nach Tölz.
How do you say, whom, object, in German?
Wen, accusative.
How do you say, to visit, in German?
Besuchen.
How do you say, who are you going to visit there, in German?
Wen wollen Sie denn dort besuchen?
How do you say, the parents, in German?
Die Eltern.
How do you say, of, in German?
Von.
How do you say, Mr., object, in German?
Herrn, Dative.
How do you say, Mr. Keller's parents, in German?
Die Eltern von Herrn Keller.
How do you say, you know Mr. Keller, don't you, in German?
Sie kennen doch Herrn Keller, nicht wahr?
How do you say, to work, in German?
Arbeiten.
How do you say, he works, in German?
Arbeitet.
How do you say, I believe he works at the consulate too, in German?
Ich glaube, arbeitet auch im Konsulat.
How do you say, even, as a matter of fact, in German?
Sogar.
How do you say, yes, as a matter of fact I know him very well, in German?
Ja, ich kenne ihn sogar sehr gut.
How do you say, he lives, in German?
Wohnt.
How do you say, quite, in German?
Ganz.
How do you say, in my vicinity, near me, in German?
In meiner Nähe.
How do you say, he lives quite near me now, in German?
Wohnt jetzt ganz in meiner Nähe.
How do you say, I go, I ride, in German?
Ich fahre.
How do you say him, object, in German?
Ihm, Dative.
How do you say with him, in German?
Mit ihm.
How do you say home, in German?
Nach Hause.
How do you say I often ride home with him, in German?
Ich fahre oft mit ihm nach Hause.
How do you say can you, in German?
Können Sie.
How do you say me, to me, in German?
Mir, Dative.
How do you say the address, in German?
Die Adresse.
How do you say new, in German?
Neu.
How do you say his new address, in German?
Seine neue Adresse.
How do you say to give, in German?
Geben.
How do you say can you give me his new address, in German?
Können Sie mir seine neue Adresse geben?
How do you say gladly, in German?
Gerne.
How do you say to be allowed to, in German?
Dürfen.
How do you say may I, in German?
Darf ich?
How do you say the passport, in German?
Der Pass.
How do you say your passport, object, in German?
Ihren Pass, Accusative.
How do you say to see, in German?
Sehen.
How do you say may I see your passport, in German?
Darf ich Ihren Pass sehen?
How do you say to be called, named, in German?
Heißen.
How do you say you are called, your name is, in German?
Sie heißen.
How do you say, what is your name, Bauer or Brauer, in German?
Wie heißen Sie, Bauer oder Brauer?
How do you say, I am called, my name is, in German?
Ich heiße.
How do you say, my name is Brauer, in German?
Ich heiße Brauer.
How do you say, were you, have you been, in German?
Waren Sie.
How do you say, already, before, in German?
Schon.
How do you say, once, here, ever, in German?
Einmal.
How do you say, Germany, in German?
Deutschland.
How do you say, have you ever been in Germany before, in German?
Waren Sie schon einmal in Deutschland?
How do you say, still, yet, in German?
Noch.
How do you say, not yet, in German?
Noch nicht.
How do you say, no, not yet, in German?
Nein, noch nicht.
How do you say, where are you going to, in German?
Wo fahren Sie hin?
How do you say, to Frankfurt, in German?
Nach Frankfurt.
How do you say, well, in German?
Also.
How do you say, to have to, in German?
Müssen.
How do you say, the customs office, in German?
Der Zoll.
How do you say, to, in German?
Zu.
How do you say, to the customs office, in German?
Zum Zoll.
How do you say, well, then you still have to go to the customs office, in German?
Also, dann müssen Sie jetzt noch zum Zoll.
How do you say, where is the customs office, in German?
Wo ist denn der Zoll?
How do you say, over there? Do you see it, in German?
Da drüben, sehen Sie?
How do you say, yes, thanks, in German?
Ja, danke.
How do you say, to come, in German?
Kommen.
How do you say, from that place, in German?
Her.
How do you say, where do you come from, in German?
Wo kommen Sie her?
How do you say, out of, from, in German?
Aus.
How do you say, I come from America, in German?
Ich komme aus Amerika.
How do you say, to declare, in German?
Verzollen.
How do you say, to declare, to be declared, in German?
Zu verzollen.
How do you say, do you have anything to declare, in German?
Haben Sie etwas zu verzollen?
How do you say, I don't believe so, in German?
Ich glaube nicht.
How do you say, the baggage, luggage, in German?
Das Gepäck.
How do you say, your baggage, luggage, in German?
Ihr Gepäck.
How do you say, to show, in German?
Zeigen.
How do you say, show me your luggage, please, in German?
Zeigen Sie mir bitte Ihr Gepäck.
How do you say, to, whom, in German?
Wem Dative?
How do you say, to belong, in German?
Gehören.
How do you say, he, it belongs, in German?
Er gehört.
How do you say the suitcase in German?
Der Koffer.
How do you say this suitcase in German?
Dieser Koffer.
How do you say who does this suitcase here belong to in German?
Wem gehört dieser Koffer hier?
How do you say that one in German?
Der.
How do you say that one doesn't belong to me in German?
Der gehört mir nicht.
How do you say only in German?
Nur.
How do you say these two suitcases in German?
Diese zwei Koffer.
How do you say I only have these two suitcases in German?
Ich habe nur diese zwei Koffer.
How do you say thanks very much in German?
Danke sehr.
How do you say everything in German?
Alles.
How do you say the order in German?
Die Ordnung.
How do you say in order in German?
In Ordnung.
How do you say everything's in order in German?
Alles in Ordnung.
How do you say the trip in German?
Die Reise.
How do you say a good trip in German?
Gute Reise.
How do you say have a good trip in German?
Gute Reise.
Thank you for watching. For comments, suggestions and corrections, get in touch.